The first sign that humanity was thoroughly screwed came at exactly 3:47 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, when every electronic device on Earth started broadcasting the same message in a voice that sounded like a garbage disposal trying to digest a fork. Humans of Earth, your primitive species has been deemed unworthy of continued existence. Our fleet approaches. Prepare for annihilation in exactly 7 Earth days. We suggest using this time to get your affairs in order. Also, please note that this message will repeat every hour until your destruction. Have a pleasant day. The UN Security Council emergency session that followed could best be described as organized chaos, if one was being extraordinarily generous with the word organized. Representatives from every major nation were talking over each other, their voices getting progressively higher in pitch with each passing minute. "We must launch every nuclear weapon we have," screamed the Russian delegate, pounding his fist on the table hard enough to make his water glass do a little dance. "Are you insane?" The Chinese representative's normally perfectly coiffed hair was starting to resemble an electrocuted porcupine. "That would just make them angry." "Gentlemen, please." The U.S. general stood up, straightening his uniform. "Our best option is clearly to—" He never got to finish his sentence because at that exact moment, the massive oak doors of the council chamber burst open with a bang that made several delegates dive under the table. In walked Eleanor Martinez, all 4 feet 11 inches of her, wielding her trusty rolling pin like a scepter. Her silver hair was perfectly coiffed in its usual bun, her floral dress pressed and spotless, and her orthopedic shoes squeaked slightly against the marble floor as she marched straight to the center of the room. "What is the meaning of this?" spluttered the UN Secretary-General. "This is a closed session! Security!" The 2 security guards who stepped forward took one look at Eleanor's face and suddenly remembered urgent appointments elsewhere. They'd grown up in New York. They knew exactly who she was. "Now you listen here." Eleanor's voice cut through the chaos like a hot knife through butter. "I've been watching this nonsense on TV, and I've had quite enough. You're all running around like headless chickens when the solution is obvious." "Mom?" The U.S. general tried to regain control of the situation. "With all due respect, this is a matter of global security." "Respect?" Eleanor's eyebrow shot up so high it nearly disappeared into her hairline. "I'll tell you about respect, young man. These aliens, they're nothing but badly behaved children who need a proper lesson in manners. And who better to teach them than a grandmother?" The room fell silent. The kind of silence that happens when someone says something so completely unexpected that everyone's brain needs a moment to reboot. "Now," Eleanor continued, holding up her rolling pin, "who wants to hear my plan?" The UN Security Council, faced with impending doom and a grandmother who had once made the entire Brooklyn mob apologize and clean up their graffiti, did the only sensible thing they could. They listened. The UN Security Council chamber had transformed from a room of panicking world leaders into what essentially resembled a chastened classroom, with Eleanor Martinez standing at the front, rolling pin resting casually on her shoulder like a drill sergeant's baton. "First of all," she said, adjusting her glasses with her free hand, "whoever designed these chairs should be ashamed. Not a single cushion in sight. No wonder you're all so cranky." The Russian delegate, who had been about to object, suddenly closed his mouth. His grandmother had said something similar last week. "Now then, about my qualifications." Eleanor paced the room with the confidence of someone who had spent 40 years teaching middle school before retirement. 3 years ago, I convinced the Genovese family to not only stop their protection racket, but also to repaint Mrs. Goldstein's fence, for free. The FBI representative in the room choked on his coffee. They'd spent 15 years trying to build a case against the Genovese family. "Last summer," she continued, "I caught those street racing hooligans on Avenue B. Now they come over every Sunday for tea and help me with my gardening. And just last month, I got those tech startup boys next door to stop playing their horrible music at all hours. They even learned to bake proper cookies." The US general raised his hand like a schoolboy. Eleanor nodded at him. "Ma'am, while that's impressive, we're talking about an advanced alien civilization with technology capable of interstellar travel." Eleanor snorted. "Advanced? They're sending hourly messages just to tell us they're going to destroy us. That's not advanced. That's showing off. My grandson Tommy went through that phase when he got his first car. Would not stop revving the engine at red lights until I had a little chat with him." She walked over to the massive screen showing the alien fleet's approach. "Look at these ships. All pointy and covered in threatening-looking weapons. Classic overcompensation. Trust me, I've been dealing with badly behaved children, teenagers, and grown men who act like teenagers for over 60 years. These aliens, they're just bullies with fancy toys." "But how exactly do you plan to—" the Chinese representative began. Eleanor held up her rolling pin. The light seemed to gleam off its well-worn wooden surface. "This right here has solved more conflicts than all your fancy weapons combined. And if that doesn't work—" She reached into her large purse and pulled out a wooden spoon and a worn leather chancla that made several Latin American delegates instinctively sit up straighter. "My plan is simple. You're going to send me up there with a ship full of baking supplies and a few choice words about their behavior. Sometimes all a troublemaker needs is to be reminded that somewhere out there a grandmother is very disappointed in their life choices." The Secretary of Defense laughed nervously. "You can't be serious." Eleanor fixed him with the look, the one that had made hardened mob bosses apologize and promise to call their mothers. "Young man, when was the last time you called your grandmother?" He paled. I should do that right now, actually." "Good boy." Eleanor turned back to the rest of the council. "Now, here's what we're going to need. A ship that looks like a proper home. None of these chrome monstrosities you military types love so much. I want a front porch, window boxes for flowers, and a kitchen that would make Martha Stewart jealous. Those aliens are going to learn that you don't threaten a planet without at least sitting down for cookies first." The President of the United States, conferencing in on the main screen, cleared his throat. "Ms. Martinez, you do understand this is absolutely insane." "Of course it is, dear," Eleanor smiled sweetly. "But your sane options all involve getting blown up. Me? I once got the entire New York Yankees team to apologize for spitting sunflower seeds on my sidewalk. And I did it while baking a perfect batch of snickerdoodles." The room was quiet for a long moment. Finally, the Secretary General spoke. "All those in favor of giving Mrs. Martinez whatever she needs to save Earth?" The vote was unanimous, though that might have had something to do with the way Eleanor was tapping her rolling pin against her palm while they voted. Operation Grandma's House was officially a go. The scene at NASA's main facility was something that would have made any serious sci-fi writer quit their job and take up gardening instead. Engineers who had spent decades designing sleek spacecraft were now arguing about the proper placement of window boxes on a ship that looked like a Victorian cottage had gotten lost on its way to a historical preservation society. "The petunias need to be visible from the approach vector," Eleanor insisted, watching as another crew of engineers frantically redesigned the life support systems to accommodate her herb garden. "It sets the right tone." In the background, a team of military experts was attempting to give her combat training. The keyword being attempting. "Mrs. Martinez, please, you need to learn these evasive maneuvers," pleaded Colonel Richards, who had trained Navy SEALs but was now being thoroughly ignored by a grandmother checking her recipe cards. "Honey, the only evasive maneuver I need is 40 years of experience dodging questions about when my grandkids are going to get married," Eleanor replied, not looking up from her index card collection. "Now, do you think snickerdoodles are too casual for first contact, or should I go straight to my blue ribbon winning chocolate chip cookies?" Her granddaughter Maria, who had been assigned as mission control liaison, mostly because she was the only person Eleanor couldn't intimidate, was trying to help her grandmother into a spacesuit. "Abuela, please, you need to wear this." Eleanor looked at the suit with the same expression she reserved for people who used boxed cake mix. "I am not going to greet visitors wearing that glorified trash bag. I'll wear my good dress, the one with the flowers, and my pearls." "You can't wear pearls in space." "Watch me." Meanwhile, in the weapons briefing room, Eleanor's rolling pin was causing an unprecedented crisis in military classification. Nobody could figure out how to categorize it in the official documentation. "Ma'am," a flustered lieutenant approached Eleanor with a clipboard, "we need to know if your rolling pin should be classified as a blunt instrument or a psychological deterrent." "Yes," Eleanor replied cryptically, then turned back to her more important task of organizing her spice rack. The ship itself, officially designated as Residential 01, but which Eleanor insisted on calling Cottage in the Stars, was a miracle of engineering forced to cope with grandmotherly demands. The kitchen could have powered a small restaurant. The living room featured a rocking chair bolted to the floor with antimatter-rated seat cushions, and the entire hull was painted a cheerful yellow with white trim. "The cookies will need gravity," Eleanor had insisted during the design phase. "But the artificial gravity generators add 6 tons to the launch weight," protested the chief engineer. "Did I stutter?" They installed the generators. The final touch was the front porch, complete with a swing and what appeared to be the galaxy's first space-hardened welcome mat. The mat read, "Wipe your tentacles," in 15 languages, including 3 that humans hadn't encountered yet. The night before launch, Eleanor sat in her new kitchen, surrounded by enough baking supplies to feed a small army, or 1 teenage grandson. Maria found her there, humming while writing in a small notebook. "Abuela, are you sure about this? Those aliens, they've destroyed other worlds before." Eleanor looked up, her eyes twinkling. "Did I ever tell you about the time your father thought he could sneak out of the house at 16? Only about 100 times. And what happened?" Maria sighed. "He made it 3 steps before you caught him, and he ended up spending the weekend reorganizing the attic instead." "Exactly." Eleanor patted her rolling pin lovingly. "These aliens think they're so tough with their death rays and their plasma cannons, but I bet not one of them knows the proper way to fold a fitted sheet. Trust your abuela, mi amor. Sometimes the universe just needs a timeout and a cookie." As she spoke, the alien message blared once again through every speaker. "Prepare for annihilation." Eleanor just shook her head and muttered, "We'll see about that, young man. We'll just see about that." The next morning, as Eleanor climbed aboard her floral-painted spacecraft, wearing her best dress, pearls, and orthopedic shoes, space-rated after a fierce argument with NASA, she carried with her the hopes of humanity, 3 dozen fresh cookies, and a rolling pin that was about to become the most feared weapon in the galaxy. The fate of Earth rested in the hands of a grandmother who had never lost an argument in her life. The aliens didn't stand a chance. The alien fleet, in all its terrifying glory, hung in space like a collection of extremely pointy Christmas ornaments. Their ships were black as night, covered in spikes, and radiated enough energy to power several small countries. They were the epitome of everything humanity feared about hostile alien civilizations. And then a yellow cottage with white trim and flowering window boxes puttered into view. On the alien flagship's bridge, Supreme Commander Zixtal of the dreaded Horaxis Empire nearly choked on his tentacle coffee. "What in the name of the void is that?" His second-in-command adjusted all 4 sets of eyes, trying to make sense of the sensor readings. "Sir, it appears to be a dwelling, with a porch. And are those petunias?" Inside her cozy spacecraft, Eleanor was putting the finishing touches on a fresh batch of cookies while humming, "You Are My Sunshine." The smell of baked goods had somehow overcome the ship's air filtration system, making the entire vessel smell like a grandmother's kitchen on Sunday afternoon. "Ma'am?" Maria's voice came through the comms from Earth. The alien fleet is hailing us. They sound confused. Of course they are, dear. Nobody expects cookies in space. Eleanor straightened her pearls and smoothed her dress. Put them through. The alien commander's face appeared on Eleanor's kitchen view screen, looking like what would happen if an octopus tried to mate with a particularly angry cactus. His voice boomed through the speakers. "Insignificant human vessel! You dare to—" "Young man," Eleanor cut him off. "There is no need to shout. I'm not deaf, just old. Now, would you care for a cookie? They're fresh from the oven." There was a long pause. The kind of pause that happens when an unstoppable force meets an immovable grandmother. What? The alien commander's tentacles twitched in confusion. "We are here to destroy your planet." Eleanor nodded, arranging cookies on her best plate. "And I'm sure that seemed like a good idea at the time. But first, you're going to come over here, sit down, and explain to me exactly what made you think threatening nice people was acceptable behavior." "We do not take orders from inferior beings." A smaller alien ship moved threateningly toward Eleanor's cottage. What happened next would be debated in alien military academies for centuries to come. Eleanor's rolling pin, thrown with the precision of 60 years of practice, somehow curved through the vacuum of space, bounced off the small ship's hull with a surprisingly musical ping, and returned to her hand like a boomerang. The alien ship's engines sputtered and died. "Now then," Eleanor said, catching her rolling pin without even looking, "would anyone else like to be rude? Or can we discuss this like civilized beings over cookies?" The alien commander's mouth tentacles worked soundlessly for a moment. Then, in a much quieter voice, he asked, What kind of cookies?" "Chocolate chip, snickerdoodle, and oatmeal raisin. Though you don't strike me as an oatmeal raisin person." The commander looked at his subordinates, who were all suddenly very interested in their control panels. "Our docking protocols are unnecessarily complicated, I'm sure. Just pull up alongside the porch, and wipe your tentacles on the mat, please. I just cleaned the floors." Back on Earth, the combined military forces of humanity watched in stunned silence as the most fearsome alien warship in the galaxy delicately maneuvered itself next to a cottage in space. Their sensors picked up the sound of Eleanor's voice saying, "Mind the petunias, dear. They're not as sturdy as they look." 15 minutes later, the Supreme Commander of the dreaded Haraxis Empire was sitting at Eleanor's kitchen table, all of his tentacles wrapped around a mug of hot chocolate with mini marshmallows, trying to explain interstellar conquest while being subjected to the look. "So let me get this straight," Eleanor said, pushing the cookie plate closer to him. "You're destroying planets because some other aliens made fun of your empire's size." "The Galactic Council said we were small and insignificant," the commander protested, instinctively reaching for another cookie. "We had to prove our worth." "By throwing a temper tantrum with death rays?" "Young man, my grandson tried that same nonsense with his video games. He spent the next month learning needlepoint instead. Speaking of which..." She pulled out her knitting needles, which glinted ominously in the kitchen lights. The commander's skin, already a pale blue, went practically white. The first battle for Earth's survival was won with chocolate chips and grandmother disappointment. But Eleanor wasn't done yet. Not by a long shot. Within 24 hours of Eleanor Martinez boarding the alien flagship, the most feared warship in the galaxy had undergone some significant changes. The bridge now had curtains to brighten up the place. The mess hall had been converted into a proper dining room. You can't eat war rations forever. And the weapons control center now smelled perpetually of freshly baked cookies. "Straighten your tentacles when you're at the table, dear," Eleanor instructed a young alien warrior who was trying to figure out how to hold a teacup with appendages designed for crushing steel. "And would anyone like to explain why there are plasma cannon casings scattered around like dirty laundry?" "But those are vital weapon components." One of the engineers started to protest. Eleanor's rolling pin made a soft tapping sound against her palm. The engineer quickly amended, "Which I'll organize right away, ma'am." Back on Earth, military intelligence was having a collective aneurysm trying to understand what was happening. The alien fleet's communications had shifted from threats of annihilation to discussions about proper table settings and recipe exchanges. "She's got them organizing a bake sale," Maria reported, trying not to laugh at the generals' faces. "For charity." The most dramatic change was in Supreme Commander Zixtal himself. The fearsome leader who had destroyed 3 solar systems was now regularly seen helping Eleanor carry her groceries, delivered weekly by extremely confused NASA supply ships, and apologizing for tracking moon dust on her clean floors. "Now tell me again," Eleanor said one afternoon, while teaching alien officers how to cross-stitch, "about this galactic council that made fun of you. They said our empire was smaller than a Zygonian dust mite," Zixtal muttered, concentrating hard on not tangling his thread with his tentacles. "Called us the Galaxy's Junior League." "Mm-hmm." Eleanor adjusted her glasses. "And did destroying planets make you feel better about that?" The Supreme Commander of the most feared fleet in space shuffled his tentacles uncomfortably. "Not really. And now Mum won't stop calling about it." "Your mother?" Eleanor's eyebrows shot up with the precision of heat-seeking missiles. "The matriarch of our species," he admitted. "She's been sending disapproving psychic messages ever since we started this conquest thing. Says it's not how she raised us." Eleanor's eyes twinkled. "You don't say. Would you like to call her? I'm sure she'd love to hear from you." The color drained from all 17 of Zixtal's facial appendages. Meanwhile, the younger alien crew members had started sneaking into Eleanor's kitchen for late-night cookie raids and advice about their life choices. She'd set up what she called Grandma's Guidance Hours, which was basically cosmic therapy with baked goods. "My spawn giver wants me to go into tentacle medicine," one young warrior confessed over a plate of snickerdoodles. "But I really want to be a space florist." "You follow your dreams, sweetheart," Eleanor patted his tentacle. "And remember to call home more often." The final straw for the fleet's remaining military discipline came when Eleanor discovered their combat training room. She took one look at the high-tech battle simulations and declared, "This won't do at all." 24 hours later, the room had been converted into what she called productive energy release space. The fearsome warriors of the Haraxis Empire were now learning knitting, cookie decoration, and what Eleanor termed constructive conflict resolution. "But how will we maintain our combat readiness?" wailed the combat instructor. "Honey, have you tried organizing a bake sale with competing grandmothers? That's all the combat training anyone needs." The transformation reached its peak when Eleanor organized what she called a little get-together in the flagship's main hangar. Every ship in the fleet sent representatives, all of them clutching hastily baked goods and looking nervously at their behavior evaluation cards. Eleanor had implemented a sticker system for good manners. "Now," she announced to the assembled alien armada, "we're going to learn about sharing our feelings instead of our plasma cannons. And remember, everyone has to compliment someone else's baking, even if you don't mean it. That's what civilized beings do." As the aliens awkwardly mingled, carefully balancing cookies on their various appendages, Eleanor smiled satisfactorily. Phase 1 of her plan was complete. The fleet that had come to destroy Earth was now more concerned about getting a gold star on their manners chart than planetary annihilation. But she wasn't done yet. After all, she hadn't gotten to meet these aliens' parents. And if there was one thing Eleanor Martinez knew, it was that every problem in the galaxy could be solved by having a nice chat with someone's mother. It was during one of her weekly proper posture and pastries sessions that Eleanor finally uncovered the real truth behind the invasion. She was teaching a group of alien officers how to make her prize-winning apple pie when one of them accidentally let it slip. "This is much better than the revenge we planned for the Galactic Council's young ones," the officer said, then immediately wrapped all 6 hands over his mouthparts. Eleanor's rolling pin paused mid-roll. Young ones? What exactly do you mean by that, dear? Supreme Commander Zixtal, who had become surprisingly good at crimping pie crusts, suddenly found the ceiling fascinating. Zixtal. Eleanor used the voice, the one that could make hardened criminals call their mothers. Look at me when I'm talking to you. The Supreme Commander of the dreaded Haraxis Empire, conqueror of stars, destroyer of worlds, mumbled something under his breath. I didn't quite catch that. The Galactic Council members who made fun of us? They were all just children of the actual council members, he admitted. At a space prom. Eleanor put down her rolling pin with the careful precision of a bomb disposal expert. Are you telling me that you were planning to destroy Earth because some teenagers were mean to you at a dance? The silence in the kitchen was thicker than Eleanor's famous double fudge brownies. That's it. Eleanor wiped her hands on her apron. Maria, dear, get me a connection to the Galactic Council. It's time for a proper parent-teacher conference. The transmission that followed would go down in galactic history as the Great Grandmother Intervention. Eleanor, sitting in her rocking chair with her rolling pin in her lap, faced the assembled Galactic Council. A group of beings that looked like a cosmic zoo designed by someone with too much imagination and not enough sleep. Now then, Eleanor began, her voice carrying the weight of every grandmother who had ever caught someone sneaking cookies before dinner. We need to have a serious discussion about your children's behavior. The council members, the most powerful beings in the galaxy, found themselves instinctively sitting up straighter. First of all, she continued, I have a fleet full of young people who felt they had to prove themselves through violence because your children made them feel small. That's not acceptable. But one of the council members started. I'm not finished. Eleanor's eyes flashed. And you, Supreme Commander Zixtal, planning to destroy planets over a high school grudge? What would your mother say? She would say exactly that, came a new voice, as another transmission cut in. The Haraxis matriarch, a being who looked like Zixtal, but with significantly more impressive tentacle jewelry, appeared on screen. Eleanor and I have been having lovely chats about our children's behavior. Zixtal made a sound like a deflating balloon. What followed was 3 hours of what Eleanor called constructive family dialogue, but what the rest of the galaxy would remember as the Great Shaming. Every parent on the Galactic Council had something to say about their children's behavior. Every child had to apologize for their actions. There were tears from species capable of crying, promises to do better from species capable of speech, and interpretive guilt dances from species that communicated through movement. By the end of it, the Haraxis Empire had been invited to join the Galactic Council. Because inclusion is important, dears. Earth was granted protected status as a cultural treasure, specifically for its cookies, and Eleanor had somehow been appointed as the head of the newly formed Intergalactic Committee for Proper Behavior and Baked Goods. And one more thing, Eleanor added as the meeting wrapped up. I'm starting a monthly cookie exchange between all council members. Attendance is mandatory. Bring your children. The most feared fleet in the galaxy departed Earth's orbit 2 days later, but not before Eleanor had made them clean their ships, write thank you notes to NASA for the supply deliveries, and promise to call their mothers more often. As the last ship disappeared into hyperspace, Eleanor sat in her rocking chair, contentedly knitting what appeared to be a sweater, sized for someone with tentacles. Abuela, Maria asked, did you plan this all along? Eleanor smiled mysteriously. Dear, when you've been a grandmother as long as I have, you learn that every problem in the universe comes down to the same thing. Someone, somewhere, needs a timeout and a cookie. The rolling pin sat in her lap, gleaming softly in the starlight, its work done. At least until next time. 6 months after the almost apocalypse, Eleanor Martinez's Brooklyn apartment had become the most important diplomatic hub in the known universe. The line of spacecraft waiting to dock at the specially constructed landing pad behind her building looked like a cosmic conga line designed by a committee of sugar-high architects. Her famous rolling pin now resided in the Smithsonian's new Instruments of Peace exhibition, though she'd kept visiting Wright's and checked it out every third Sunday to keep it from getting lazy. Next to it was a plaque that read, "With this humble kitchen implement, humanity's first space grandma saved Earth through the power of properly applied guilt and baked goods." The Galactic Council had made some changes too. Their main chamber now featured antimatter-powered cookie warmers, and all diplomatic sessions began with a mandatory sharing circle. The sight of beings from across the cosmos sitting in a circle discussing their feelings while dunking cookies in various substances, some of which defied physics, had become the new normal. Eleanor's kitchen calendar was booked solid with appointments. Mondays were for teaching young Haraxis warriors the art of flower arrangement, because if you're going to have tentacles, you might as well use them to make something pretty. Tuesdays were reserved for counseling sessions with former space pirates, who now operated an interstellar cookie delivery service. "Your chocolate chip cookies saved my marriage," a three-headed diplomat told her one afternoon, "though my spouse still says I'm not measuring the vanilla correctly." "That's because you're not," Eleanor replied, adjusting all three of their bow ties. "We'll work on that." The Intergalactic Committee for Proper Behavior and Baked Goods, ICPBG, had become the most influential organization in the galaxy. Their seal, a rolling pin crossed with a cookie, was more respected than any military insignia. Young aliens were sent to Earth for what their parents called character-building experiences, which mostly involved learning to bake with Eleanor, while she subtly talked them through their life choices. Her granddaughter Maria had been promoted to Chief of Interstellar Grandmother Relations at NASA, a position created specifically because no one else could handle the volume of alien grandmothers asking for Eleanor's recipes. Even the former Supreme Commander Zixtal had changed careers. He now ran a successful chain of cafes called Peace Through Pastries, though he still called Eleanor every Sunday to check his snickerdoodle technique. The monthly Galactic Cookie Exchange had become the most anticipated event in the cosmic calendar. Species that had been at war for millennia now argued passionately about proper baking temperatures and the structural integrity of various frosting techniques. Eleanor had to break up only one fight, which had erupted over whether plasma-charged sprinkles were considered performance-enhancing substances in the annual bake-off. On quiet evenings, Eleanor could still be found in her kitchen, teaching the basics of human kindness to whatever alien dignitaries happened to stop by. Her recipe book had been translated into 417 languages, including 3 that consisted entirely of interpretive dance. "The secret," she'd tell her cosmic students as they gathered around her kitchen table, "isn't in the ingredients. It's in remembering that everyone in this great big universe is somebody's child. And sometimes all anybody needs is a grandmother to remind them of that." Her new rolling pin, a gift from the Galactic Council made from metal forged in the heart of a dying star, hung on her wall, a reminder that the universe's most effective peacekeeping tool wasn't a weapon at all. It was a grandmother who refused to let anyone misbehave on her watch. And if occasionally she had to use it to remind some upstart alien empire about their manners, well, that's what grandmothers do.